Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds as people join the webinar today, and we'll get started. All right, well, I want to welcome everyone to our TCLAS Deep Dive webinar for Decision 6 support. We'll get started with introductions. My name's Colby Self. I'm the Director of Texas Tutoring Supports. And joining me today is Lizette Ridgway. Let her say hi.
Yeah, good afternoon, folks. I'm glad to see so many people joining us this afternoon. As Colby said, I'm Lizette Ridgway. I'm the Director of District Systems and Strategies at the agency. And so tutoring is one of the work streams that I oversee. So excited to be partnering with Colby on this presentation today.
Well, good deal. Before we get started, some logistical notes. We have Zach Lyons and Dr. Monica Ruiz-Mills. They're going to be helping with the Q&A today. So as questions come up, if they're not answered in the presentation, if you'll add them to the Q&A, we'll try to get to them at the end if we can. If not, they will be part of a Q&A function that we're going to develop out from these webinars. So answering those questions as they come along. And all materials are going to be posted on the TEA website. That includes this slide deck and a copy or a video download where you can watch this again if you need to. So the agenda today is to recap what is TCLAS. We are going to have a decision point deep dive, a question and answer and next steps section. First of all, let's start with the recap of what is TCLAS. So TCLAS is Texas COVID Learning Accelerated Supports, and it's targeted supports and additional state and federal funding. And it's aligned to our learning framework. LEAs can access TCLAS funding. The whole purpose is to have a streamlined application process so that LEAs can go through the 10 decisions and decide what is a best fit for them and their needs. It's to take away a lot of the obstacles that a lot of grant applications would have and provide easy budget calculations and such. And we'll go through that in a little more detail here shortly.
So TCLAS is definitely one of a kind, and it is the first time that the agency has tried to do this approach and getting kind of a large amount of money out to the agency. So wanted to highlight that this is a discretionary non-competitive grant. So you all are going to know, probably it'll feel a lot more like a formula grant that maybe you have applied for in the past. So as Colby said, there's not going to be the narrative responses, but there is, I think the key difference here is in the past, you've had to submit several applications to apply for multiple supports. And so this is access to one pot of money that would then provide you to the opportunity to apply for 15 different supports or key initiatives that are included in this grant, all through a single district application. So this is a great opportunity for us to try to get a very large amount of money out to the districts without increasing the burden on the districts to apply for various different grants. So we hope that folks are going to take advantage of this, as well as providing us feedback to see how well this worked and if this is something that we should continue doing in the future. So let's go ahead and now take a look at what's included in TCLAS. So the middle three columns is probably something that you have probably seen before. We covered it in the webinar, but it's also really the anchor of a lot of the conversations that the commissioner has had on his superintendent calls. And as we've been presenting around learning acceleration strategies, the foundational pieces of those presentations have been around how are districts thinking about rigorous, high quality instructional materials? How are they thinking about really kind of supporting their teachers and increasing the talent pipelines to be able to ensure that students are supported enough to really start to make some growth to fill in the gaps that maybe COVID has caused with the various different disruptions that we had this past year. And then the last one is around creating more instructional time. And so really thinking through opportunities to add more time, whether that be school day, the school year, or even maximizing summer learning time. What we've added in TCLAS as additional accelerated learning strategies is the first column, which is strategic planning. So ways for the district to get some supports around making the connections between what they were already planning for with their ESSER state plan and ways that they can actually use this TCLAS money to kind of supplant some of those efforts so that they can actually move that money over into kind of their fund balance, right? And that would really extend the life of their ESSER funds. And so that strategic planning is one support that we have added. And you'll also notice that we added a column to the far right, and that's innovative school models. This is where you're going to find how some of these learning acceleration strategies really fit at the campus level. So this next slide that we're going to look at is going to kind of identify the decision points that are in each one of these learning acceleration components. So Colby, if you'll go to the next slide. So as Colby talked about, oh, sorry, go up one.
Sorry about that.
One more.
There you go.
There we are. And so when you think about kind of these 5 learning acceleration strategies, districts are going to be asked to consider these supports as individual decisions. So today's focus is really looking at the more time column, and we're going to specifically look at decision 6, which is tutoring supports. When we think about the tutoring supports, the money that is available through tutoring through TCLAS is actually able to also span the life of these funds. And so when you're thinking about applying for tutoring supports, you're thinking about how much money would be beneficial for the district to have when you're thinking about funding for 21-22, thinking about school year 22-23, as well as school year 23-24. And so within this one application in decision point 6 for tutoring, you're going to be able to apply for grant funding that would then be used for any or all of these 3 years. So turning it back to Colby, and let's take a kind of a deeper look into kind of what all the supports that this includes.
So I'm going to go through components of the TCLAS guiding document that's available, and we have links at the end for you. But I'm going to kind of dissect these areas out and talk a little bit about them in more depth. If we look at high impact tutoring, the research has been done for years regarding the impact it has on students. And high impact tutoring is something that we've had a lot of districts roll out and implement. If you've attended any of our tutoring webinar series and seen examples of high impact tutoring's implementation in a lot of districts and how they've made it work for them, the possibilities are there to move students forward significantly. So to effectively implement a high impact tutoring program, there's some key attributes that we want to review. I'm going to hit highlights on some of these components: well-trained and consistent tutors, high quality instructional material, the one-on-one small group recommended. For House Bill 4545, we know that there's a requirement of a 1-to-3 ratio unless there's a parent waiver obtained to have more. And the persistence of 3 sessions per week, that's for high impact tutoring. 3 sessions per week is recommended, and it's data driven. So the research has been expanded to include that info. And then I'll turn it back to Lizette as she reviews some of the guiding questions from the TCLAS document as well.
Thanks, Colby. So when you're thinking about applying for decision point 6 for tutoring supports, I think there's several things that that a district needs to be taking into consideration. I think the best place to get that started would be to really reviewing the guiding questions for this particular support, and those are found on page 48. So what's on the slide here is not an exhaustive list of everything that's captured on 48, but I do feel like these might be the best questions to start with. So Colby briefly talked about the requirements of House Bill 4545 and kind of the impact that that's going to have across the state. So I think one of the things that I feel pretty confident in saying is that districts will have students that will require accelerated instruction. And if they're providing accelerated instruction, I think a decision that a district will need to make is, are we aiming for meeting compliance requirements for House Bill 4545, or are we wanting to take it up a couple of notches and really try to do the high impact tutoring? I think both of them would actually be something to consider when you're applying for this particular grant, right? The House Bill 4545 requirements will be embedded in all of the tutoring supports. And that's why we're really kind of talking about these together. So the guiding questions that you would want to ask yourself is, how many students will be required to receive tutoring based on this past legislation? So starting with, what are the numbers that we're going to have to provide tutoring for? The next question would be, does the LEA already have access to high quality instructional materials? Or is your curriculum department already thinking about what materials teachers will be using for tutoring? And if it isn't the teachers, then how are you going to be providing high quality instructional materials to whatever tutors you are going to be using? The next question would be, will the LEA kind of design their own tutoring program? Are they thinking about contracting with an external tutoring provider to kind of come in and provide those tutoring services? Or are they wanting to do some level of a hybrid, which is utilizing what TEA is already subsidizing and utilizing those supports to actually implement on their campuses? And then the last piece is, what is the LEA's tutoring program budget? These 4 questions will really help you identify if this particular support is a good fit for your district. So once you've identified that this is, you're wanting to use the TEA subsidized supports, and this could be because you have a large amount of students that you're needing to provide tutoring for. This could be that the budget maybe doesn't allow for, the tutoring, I guess the expansiveness of your tutoring program. And so you really want to limit costs. Then decision point 6 might be kind of the best option for you. And what this includes is that for those districts that are utilizing the TEA subsidized materials, right? And so really counting on the agency to really pay for a lot of the big costs associated with the licenses, associated with like the vetting of the instructional materials. And they have a large amount of students that are needing accelerated instruction in 3 through 8 math and reading. Then this would be kind of where TCLAS could really support that. So within TCLAS, you could get additional monies for districts that are pursuing the vetted Texas Tutor Corps subsidized materials. And that would provide you with instructional materials. It would also provide you access to the online tutoring platform, as well as the aligned training and tutors to provide those services. So at a high level, the vetted Texas Tutor Corps is kind of 2 different strands. If you're wanting to kind of pursue your own tutoring program and you're designing your own, you just need to think about the staffing, then you could use one of the TEA approved providers, and we're going to be sharing a list in the next coming week or so, and you would be looking at the partial staffing providers. If you're wanting to go the route of a full service tutoring organization, we're going to have a TEA approved providers list, and those would be people that you could contract for or contract with to provide those tutoring programs. If you're wanting to pursue the VTTC TEA subsidized providers, which is what's circled in green, this is where the TCLAS money would live. And so if you're wanting to pursue the other approaches that I just talked about, those would not be eligible to receive funding for through TCLAS. We are really wanting to identify those districts that are utilizing our materials, that are utilizing tutors that are trained on those materials, so that we can continue to cover the costs. And so it's a way for us to really help you extend your dollars. And in some situations, this path would be pretty close to free or at a significantly reduced cost to districts that are following this path.
So as Lizette outlined, we're going to talk a little bit about the staffing cost. And we know, being in LEAs, that staffing is a majority of our funding goes to staffing. There's going to be a similar cost for tutoring. You may choose to do in-person tutoring, hybrid virtual tutoring, depending on what the options are available. Going through TCLAS offers the subsidy of up to $500,000 for qualifying LEAs, can really help offset this cost and impact on local funds with districts. Some general questions from the TCLAS guiding document are on page 30, part of the application section, but this is the general questions subsection, is just some thought questions, and also gives us feedback on the application itself. Is the LEA planning to utilize TEA subsidized high quality instructional materials, the tutoring platform, and tutor training provided through the VTTC? Again, we'll talk about the requirements, but the purpose of the TCLAS funding is to provide the access, if granted, to these areas. Will the LEA provide tutoring for students in math grades K through 8? And will the LEA provide tutoring in reading in grades K through 8? The district formula calculation and formula inputs, this is also on page 30 of the guide. Does the LEA want Decision 6A support? So there are a lot of decisions to consider in the document. So evaluating if this is a support you want to apply for as part of the comprehensive single application is going to be important to be discussed and decided upon. Students providing tutoring in math and reading, looking at approximate numbers that are going to be impacted. This would include students that are required to have tutoring under House Bill 4545, plus areas you want to extend high impact tutoring to as well in reading and math in this case. And also the number of tutors to provide the 3-to-1 ratio. Again, we want to ensure that we're complying with House Bill 4545 requirements, which do require a 3-to-1 tutor to student ratio unless a waiver is obtained from parents under the guidelines. Turn it back over to Lizette to review some of the requirements.
Yeah, and just also to build on what Colby just said, if you were to use the funding calculator that is already on the TCLAS website, you are able to actually go in and identify what would be the allocation that we would get. So in the funding calculator, if you would go to decision 6, you would be able to, select yes for the school year that you are applying. And then you would be able to input the number of students that you would be providing tutoring for, and the number of tutors that you would be providing, wanting to utilize for tutoring. And so just to let you all know, it's about $300 is the allocation per student and $2,000 per tutor. And that's really to cover the tutor training costs, but it could also get into kind of the actual tutor labor costs. So when you think about what it's going to cost the district per session delivery, so that would cover that piece as well. Because the Vetted Texas Tutor Course subsidized materials are only limited to K through 8 math and reading, knowing that tested grades would only be 3 through 8, but it does allow you to even do some additional accelerated instruction, even for those younger kiddos that did not test. If you wanted to use some of this excess money to identify how you could support students in higher grades utilizing, THL or others, you would be able to also supplant that and offset some of those costs, as long as you maintained, also providing the math and reading instruction to those grades in 3 through 8. So let's look at what are some of the requirements that you must comply with. The first one is the biggest prerequisite, and that is that you would be utilizing the TEA subsidized materials for grades 3 through 8 in math and reading, that you would be utilizing the online tutoring platform. This is particularly important because this would allow you to also serve students virtually, remotely, as well as in person. And so when you're thinking about Saturday tutorials, if you're thinking about before school or after school tutorials, it does provide a little bit more flexibility, specifically in those rural areas when students are many times on buses for long periods of time. You could potentially schedule tutoring to happen after the school day, right? Knowing that transportation is sometimes an issue for students. So the online tutoring platform would be able to serve in both roles. And then the last piece was in the burden of the training would not fall on the district. It would actually fall on our providers to provide that training. Right now, our providers would be the owners of the vetted instructional materials that we're utilizing, as well as our service centers, because we wanted to provide an opportunity for our trusted partners at ESCs to also be able to support districts regionally. Once you receive the grant allocation, the requirements are fairly simple. One of them is making sure that the district is agreeing to adhere to the statutory requirements for accelerated instruction. That is something that districts are all aiming for, is that we know that House Bill 4545, when signed into law, meant that that is now a requirement. So for those that are needing accelerated instruction, it is a requirement that districts comply to the statutory requirements that are laid out in that legislation. The second is that they are participating in data collection and reporting to TEA on the efficacy and impact of the tutoring programs. This is a significant amount of money for a new initiative in tutoring, and we want to be kind of the most responsive to districts' needs and know that we are actually having a positive impact. So what that data collection and reporting would look like is something that that we're currently iterating on. We don't expect it to be exhaustive. We also don't expect it to be anything that you all aren't already doing in tracking kind of the services that you are providing for those students. So we really hope to not increase the workload and not do any kind of duplication of effort on your part. And then the last three pieces are around covering any additional costs associated with providing tutoring. What we don't want districts to do is saying, oh, well, if we get X amount of money, that's the only thing that we can do. We really want you to stay true to the design of your tutoring program. So knowing that sometimes the grant allocation might not cover everything. And so ensuring that you're setting some money aside either through your ESSER 3 application or your local funds to ensure that you can actually fully implement your tutoring program with fidelity. The agency through this process is really trying to lower the cost as much as possible. And if we can cover it at 100%, at least for this first year, that is our goal. But we do want to make sure that you all are aware that there could potentially be additional fees as you all are designing your programs.
So some specific documents to this decision are the TCLAS guidance document, which I referenced at the beginning, and the page numbers are outlined throughout the presentation. We do have our website, Texas Tutoring Supports. If you had specific questions, it houses webinars of implementation of high impact tutoring. And then House Bill 4545 FAQ. This is truly a living document that's continually updated. As we get questions from even today that apply in this area, we will add to that. Plus, we're also going to take questions from today and work on answering those through TCLAS communications as well. So these are available to explore further detail, but we do have the next steps in the application. So we'd like to go through those, and I'll turn it back over to Lizette to talk a bit about the timeline and the process.
Yeah, so some key dates to be keeping in mind is that the survey, the grant application is going to be provided via a Qualtrics survey. That will open right now. We are on track for that to actually open on July 19th, and that is Monday. The application will be open for 30 days, so it will be closing on August 20th. The process is that districts will go in, submit their Qualtrics application based on the information that we've asked you to collect in the guidance document. So ensuring that you're reading the decision point inputs that you will need for that application. Once it opens, you can go in, submit. We ask that districts only submit once because it could be really confusing if there isn't that aligned communication within the district and you have multiple submissions. So one application. Once that application closes, TEA will be reviewing applications and will be turning around the decisions very quickly. So you will receive an initial award notification on September 10th. And that is it's going to be your cue to go in and finalize the application in eGrants, because that's what actually starts the grant negotiation process. So we expect to have all NOGAs signed out by December 1st, but that does not mean that you need to wait until December 1st to start utilizing this money. We know that many of you all will want to start providing tutoring as soon as possible and as within the school year. So if you don't feel comfortable starting, you're going to want to use your own local money, at least for the first month. When you receive that preliminary award notification on 9/10, you will know how much money you have to work with. And then you could actually utilize pre-award going all the way back to March. So that would cover any costs. If you've done any tutoring in the summer, you could be paying yourself back for that. And you would have access to the monies that you could use all through the fall and moving forward. So just making sure that your local board policy does not prohibit you from using pre-award monies for grant applications. So make sure that you're checking that as soon as possible to ensure that there isn't any board policies that are standing in the way of that. Some tools that are currently on our website already. I shared briefly around the guidance document. The guidance document, I think, is an exhaustive and very robust and thorough guidance document. It is not meant to be read cover to cover. In fact, I would utilize the fact that the table of contents allows you to click and jump around. So, you might want to read the first sections because they apply to how to use the document and how to apply. But after that, you are able to click on a decision point that you are wanting to pursue, click on the guiding questions, click on the requirements to get you the information that you actually need. The next piece is the budget calculator. It's very simple. You would go to the LEA inputs tab. You would go to decision point 6. You would input the number of students, input the number of tutors that you're applying for, and that would give you a very clear picture of the money that you're expecting to receive. Because we do think that there is going to be quite a bit of interest in this particular decision point. I think originally we had said we were going to be capping it at no more than 500,000 per school district. Depending on interest, we might have to lower that cap a little bit, but we're really hoping to provide at least additional monies to go for tutoring so that we can reduce the cost to our LEAs. For those of you that might have missed the overview webinar, it's already on our TCLAS webpage. The recording and the slides are already listed there, as well as the decision point specific webinars like ours today for the other decision points. As those are being finalized, we're actually putting them on the website within 24 hours. So please go and utilize any of those materials that we have on the website. Additionally, we have added the Zoom link to the TCLAS webpage for our office hours. Office hours will begin the week of July 26th. I think our first one is actually on July 28th. Once a week from 4 to 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, we will be available on that Zoom link, and we will have facilitators for each one of the decision points. So you are able to join the Zoom, identify which decision point you have questions around, and you would select that breakout room. So you don't have to, listen to an actual presentation. You would go in, you would talk to the facilitator in that breakout room who is an expert in that particular support, get your questions answered. If you wanted to join another breakout room and get your questions answered, you can do that during that 1 hour time frame. And so we feel like that might be the best way to get some live answers from the experts on that support. So that will happen once a week, every Wednesday from 4 to 5 while the application is open. For ease, we've just identified all of the decision point webinars that are already available. Many of them have occurred. We're kind of middle of the week this week, but we do still have 2 that are happening tomorrow. If you wanted to still register for those, you definitely can.
All right, it's time for questions. We'll defer to Zach and Monica. If y'all have some questions that have been asked that we could provide some answers for.
All right, so I think this one was touched upon briefly, but this one just confirming, would Saturday tutorials be considered under TCLAS and HB 4545?
Colby, do you want me to take this one?
Yes, Lizette, if you'll take that one.
Yeah, so I think that would, when you're thinking about the ratio, when you're thinking about the number of hours that you're wanting to provide it, so it needs for House Bill 4545, you're wanting to provide it at least once per week. If you're doing more of high impact tutoring, you're looking at a higher frequency. And so I would say that it's the district's discretion as to how they want to provide that tutoring, whether it's before school, after school, or embedded in the school day. Saturday tutorials is fine. I would say that's a local decision, but you would want to ensure that you are adhering to the hours needed for that student when you're making that decision.
Perfect. This next one is the full service VTTC the only option for receiving funds for tutoring?
So decision point 6 does require that you're using the TEA subsidized materials, the TEA subsidized online platform, and the aligned tutor, like training for tutors to use those materials. And so that is where there is money available for tutoring through TCLAS. If you're wanting to contract with an external tutoring organization that's on our pre-approved list, you can absolutely use that, but you will have to use your ESSER allocation or your local funds. If you're wanting to design your own program and you're wanting to use your own district created materials or district adopted materials, that's another situation where you would actually have to utilize your own ESSER allocations and your own local funds. If you're designing your program and using our TEA subsidized materials, that also allows you. So it's really about the materials that you're utilizing that would identify whether the TCLAS monies would be applicable to you.
And Lizette, I want to bring up another point. There were some companion bills passed with House Bill 4545 that opened up opportunities for retired teachers to serve in the role as tutor. So that is now available as a source of tutors if needed for districts.
Yeah, and I think TRS they recently last week sent out some guidance on really what districts would need to do to code their tutoring programs a certain way as the employer to ensure that there aren't as many penalties for those retired teachers. So I think familiarizing yourself with Senate Bill 288, but we will also be adding some FAQs that would point you to where that information is currently on the TRS website. So that is to come. Zach, can I also take some from in here? Do you mind if I just take a couple?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Great. So I think the one question that I see is the $500,000 for the entire grant or just for tutoring? That's the cap that we have for tutoring per LEA. And that's why I mentioned that cap might need to come down a little bit based on the interest in this particular decision point. But I would say absolutely you can get more than $500,000 for the entire grant. I would say that it's going to be probably the norm to receive a significant amount of money, depending on the number of supports that you are pursuing. The purpose of the online platform is actually where the tutors would get access to the materials. So whether they're providing kind of remote or virtual tutoring, or they're providing it live, they would actually access the materials through the online platform. That would also help them track attendance. It would help them track the number of minutes and the number of hours that they're providing training for those students. And they would be able to also collect some progress monitoring notes to see how that student is progressing. Colby, have you looked at any, is there any that you would like to address that are in the Q&A that haven't already been answered?
Let's see here.
I see a question while Colby's still looking around the VTTC for Spanish bilingual students, but not the monolingual English students. Yes, we will have materials available for students that are needing kind of bilingual materials. So you can definitely use it for any portion that you are providing tutoring anywhere within the realm of K through 8 in math and reading. So you can definitely apply for that as well.
So here's a question. Can tutoring supported through TCLAS be a hybrid or in-person and virtual? And I think there's flexibility there. Wouldn't you say so, Lizette?
Yeah, it can be in person. It can be on like remote, just using the platform, kind of more of a virtual environment, or it could be a hybrid. So I think I see that multiple times is folks wanting to know if they could do online tutoring. They can do online or in person or both.
So there's also a question of how do tutors qualify for the VTTC? Tutors or tutoring organizations can contact us through the Texas Tutoring email address, texastutoring@tea.texas.gov, and request an application. We have currently a rolling application that we're reviewing and providing information, and that list will be, the initial list of the first round will be out shortly. So if you just contact us, let us know some basic information and we'll share the application with you.
That would be for tutoring organizations. Individuals should be kind of applying directly with a district or applying through kind of a nonprofit organization. So I know that like Texas Retired Teachers is already kind of identifying their coalition of retired teachers that could serve in the tutor role. And so I think the biggest clarification would be like organizations, they can apply to be a part of our vetted TEA approved list because we're vetting them, or they could apply directly to work with a district if they're an individual.
So something else I think is important to point out, Lizette, and you could add to this, the LEAs are going to be have the ultimate responsibility for screening any tutors that may be coming on campus or be part or have access to students. Is that correct?
The LEA would be responsible for ensuring that they are basically fingerprinted, basically all the requirements that are in place before any individual can interact with a student in their district. So that will fall. As far as the tutor training, we would be able to, once you have a tutor and you're saying we've secured a tutor, we need them trained because we're using the TEA subsidized materials and the platform, then we're able to provide that tutoring to those individuals, but we will not be doing any kind of background checks or accessing like the do not hire registry.
So we're getting a lot of questions about House Bill 4545 implementation and how it fits in a high quality tutoring program. One thing that clarified that the House Bill 4545 are minimums with requirements to specific grade levels and specific amounts of time that accelerated instruction has to be provided. TCLAS Decision 6 opens the opportunity to expand above and beyond House Bill 4545 requirements to possibly lower grades, as Lizette mentioned, grades that are not tested through STAR, and really move students forward. So again, House Bill 45 has a requirement of 30 hours accelerated instruction, and we have webinars on the specifics of tutoring, and the tutoring is occurring once per week at a minimum. Versus a high impact tutoring, they recommend as many or as few as 3 times per week to get the impact that you would need to see with tutoring.
One question is so if we've secured the tutor, TEA will pay for them via TCLAS. We will give you the money to pay for any training costs associated with using our materials, like the TEA subsidized materials, as well as money that you could use to offset the cost for that tutor to provide services. So it's a $2,000 per tutor flat fee that should cover any training expenses that you might incur, as well as offset some of those session fees. And I know that we're about 2 minutes out before, so I think, Colby, we could probably take 1 or 2 more questions.
Sure. As we go through the questions, there is a bit.ly available to say if you are interested in applying for TCLAS. It's about a 1-minute survey, but you're able to go to this bit.ly here below. We're not able to put it in the chat, of course, but if you would take a moment, if you're interested, it'll kind of let us know and gauge interest in the TCLAS application. All right, going through a couple questions. Monica or Zach, did we see any other questions?
There was one that I think would be helpful for some folks in terms of tutoring materials. For the materials, are they to be used during regular instruction, or is it just tutoring only?
It can actually be for both. And so the tutoring materials would be able to be utilized in the classroom kind of as a regular core instruction, and can also be used for supplemental instruction. I think I also saw a question saying, if we're doing it as supplemental instruction as for tutoring, does that mean we also need to apply for Decision 3? No. And so yes, tutoring materials that you'll access that TEA is basically subsidizing would be able to serve for both. And they will be TEKS aligned, and they will serve, at least right now, we're thinking we're only going to be able to serve materials K-8 math and reading. So we will be releasing guidance on how to provide services for 9 through 12, knowing that that does include many more subjects. So we will release guidance on how you could potentially utilize free materials through Texas Home Learning, or kind of make use of your existing structures and materials that you have currently in your district. I know that we didn't get to about 14 questions, but based on time, we wanted to respect the schedule. So we'll be taking these questions as well as the ones that we answered, and we'll be adding them to our frequently asked questions. And we are going to be releasing that the week of July 26th. And so you can be on the lookout for that.
Just as a wrap up, if you have specific TCLAS related questions, please feel free to email tclass@teatexas.gov. If you have specific tutoring questions, you can email us at texastutoring@tea.texas.gov. And we've been receiving a lot of questions that we end up adding to the FAQs. So thank you. And those are updated about weekly now. So we'll get those updated. I want to thank you for joining us today. This will be made available on the Accelerated Learning webpage shortly after the conclusion of this webinar, along with the slide deck. Thank you for coming today.